3 years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend in a one-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half-basement unit, so the bottom of all our windows were level with the ground outside. It was also an older apartment, and not all the windows could fully lock. One day, my boyfriend comes home from work while I'm laying on the sofa and immediately runs up to the window near me and looks out of it frantically. He then goes to look out every other window in the house, then walks around the house looking in the windows. When he comes back from this confusing exploit, I ask him what the fuck is going on and why he's being a spaz. "I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you. He took off as I walked up," he tells me. This was naturally very unsettling, but after discussing it and considering the time of day, which was about 2 p.m., and the number of people out and about around the complex at that time, we came to the conclusion that it was just a curious neighbor or someone passing by happening to glance in. And with that, we forgot about it. And if only that was the end. For the next couple of months, odd stuff happened here and there. Someone would knock on the door occasionally, then when I went to answer, no one was there. And I'd find things in my apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items would vanish. I didn't really think twice about any of it, until one night. My boyfriend and I were arguing around 1 or 2 in the morning, and we were being a little loud. We were standing in the kitchen face to face, and his back was to an open window with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window, thinking that I saw the reflection of my face in it. But the window was open, and it wasn't my face. There was a man with his face pressed almost against the window screen, watching us. Given the fact that we were arguing and it was late, I thought for a moment that it might have been a concerned neighbor walking up to the window to speak to us. A main walkway for the complex was right on the other side of the window. So I spoke to him. "Hello, can I help you?" I asked a little aggressively, thinking that a neighbor was intruding on our privacy. He responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face did not change expression. He didn't blink or move, and he just looked right at me in a way that I have never been looked at before or since. In this instant, I also realized that because of the window being level with the ground, the only way that this man's face could be where it was if he was laying on the ground outside of the apartment or crouched and contorted to look into my window. My heart sank, and I buried my face in my boyfriend's chest, and I closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend, up to this point, thought that I was messing with him. When I buried my face in his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really someone at the window?" I whispered yes to him, and he felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around. By the time he did, the man was gone. It was at this point that I started to think about all the little odd occurrences that I'd been experiencing, and I assumed the worst. I filed a police report with his description, and my brother loaded my apartment up with weapons to protect me, or at least inform this peeping Tom that I was armed. After that night, myself, my boyfriend, and my brother were on high alert. There were a couple times when my brother came over that he saw a sketchy dude hanging around, and even one time he saw him at my window. He tried to follow him discreetly, but the guy took off running as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night that I had an experience with this man, I was sitting home alone on my sofa. My boyfriend was at work at a restaurant about 2 blocks away, and he had picked me up from work an hour earlier. We had sat on the sofa together a little while when we got home. Then he kissed me and left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch and on Reddit for a while in silence. And after about an hour of me sitting there in silence, I hear a door creak open. It's a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean a little to the left. I assumed it was one of my cats coming out of my bedroom. So you can imagine my shock when I lean over and see the door that's opening is the door to the water heater closet or our small storage space. I look to my right and see both my cats sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I look back to the door and it's still creaking open very slowly. It opens enough for me to see it. A set of fingers wrapped around the door, easing the door ever so gently to open it as quietly as possible. That was gonna be a no for me, dog. I ran my ass barefooted out of the door, into the snow, and down the street to my boyfriend's work. I called the cops. When everyone was back to check out the apartment, he was, of course, gone. After that, my boyfriend and I packed our shit, went to stay with my parents, and 6 months later, moved 1,000 miles away from that town. And that was the end of it. I initially found this sub around that time, as I was trying to find other stories similar to mine, or people to talk to who had experienced something like I did. I had intended to write my story here eventually, and I figured after this week's events that I really had to. I live 1,000 miles away from where all of this happened, so a part of me thinks that there's no way that this person could have found me. But last week, I heard a knock on the front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package, so I figured it was a delivery driver, and I didn't answer. I'd go get the package later, I thought. Then they knocked again, and again. The third one made me feel uneasy, so I waited a good 20 minutes to check the door. When I did, there was no package, no note, no nothing. Someone was just knocking, and although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think back to my stressful experience in my last town. Then, 2 days ago, I went out to get groceries. I have a little patio, and I go out there in the mornings to just chill or check on plants a lot, and I've been known to leave it unlocked in the day on accident. I never thought of it as a huge deal, until I came home from the store 2 days ago, and the deadbolt to my apartment was locked. The deadbolt that can only be locked from the inside of the apartment, period. I assumed someone robbed me because I dumbly left my patio unlocked. I called my sister, and I called my current boyfriend. I waited for people to be with me, and I went into my apartment through the sliding glass patio door. Nothing was out of place. Nothing of value was taken. And at this point, my heart sank. Nothing was touched, nothing stolen, but someone was inside my apartment just because they wanted to be inside of it. And I told my boyfriend about my stalker, and he is not taking the shit lightly like my past boyfriend. I filed a police report, and we checked for recording devices and cameras. He put Nest cameras up all over the place, and we are on high alert. I truly hope that this is just a coincidence, but if this man really followed me across multiple state lines, there is no one on this earth that I'm less interested in meeting. For some context, I was a 17-year-old girl in college at the time of this story. One semester, I had this awesome schedule wherein I didn't have class every Friday. So, I usually spent the day hanging out with my then boyfriend. On this particular Friday, I had to meet my friends at school for group work. Probably 2 hours later, we were done and I spent the rest of the day with my boyfriend. He couldn't send me home because he had an important thing to attend to at 6 p.m. So, he dropped me off at this particular mall at around 5 p.m. I already told my dad beforehand to pick me up after he got off work, and my dad agreed, so I waited. I walked around like any teenager, but unfortunately, my period started and I had the worst cramps ever. The kind of cramps that rendered me immobile. I was on the second floor and I spotted a bench on the ground floor. Now, this bench was beside the mall fountain and about 50 steps from an entrance or exit. My dad usually picked me up from this entrance, so I assumed that he would pick me up from there. I went down the escalator and I noticed a man hanging around the railings, just admiring the fountain. I didn't care too much because a lot of people do that. I finally settled down because my cramps were getting even worse. And mind you, a lot of people were hanging around this area. It was fairly crowded, so I didn't feel off, just sitting there alone. I didn't feel too good, so sitting there at that time sounded like a good idea. I played a game on my phone to pass the time, and after a few minutes of sitting down, probably around 15 minutes or so, this middle-aged man sat beside me. I looked at him and realized that it was the same guy checking the fountain. This bench was long and no one was sitting on the other side, and being naive, I didn't say anything and ignored him. He then started talking to me. "What's your name?" I smiled because I didn't want to be rude, and I answered him with some fake name. Then he answered what I was doing, which I answered, "I'm just playing a game." Then he said, "Can you show me how to play?" I smiled nervously and just stopped playing. I started looking around, tapping my foot out of anxiety. Then he started saying stuff like, "You know, I have money, and I worked really hard to save up." And then he added, "You're pretty young, so you gotta start saving up while you can. I know I don't look like much, but my account says otherwise." Mind you, I didn't even ask him anything. He just kept rambling about his money. And gradually, he got closer. But then he asked, "So, do you have a boyfriend?" I replied, "Yeah, I do. He's on his way now." Then he said, "A pretty girl like you shouldn't be waiting this long. Let me take you home." When he started saying these things, my heart started to race. I nervously laughed and said, "No thanks, he's on his way." He then asked, "Where do you live? I'll take you there. I don't mind spending for you." I kept trying to maintain a distance between us, but he kept inching closer to me. Then he said, "You know, I don't have a lot of money, but I can give you the whole world." I was getting so scared, so I stood up and just started walking away. Unfortunately, this man started following me. I picked up the pace and started brisk walking at this point, and he did too. I saw a mall guard by the entrance of the mall, so I ran to him and just stood beside him. He was probably confused, but he didn't say anything. Unfortunately, the sight of the mall guard didn't exactly deter him. He stood by this pillar across me and just waited. I was so determined not to leave the mall guard who was busy inspecting bags. The man probably waited for 3 minutes before he walked up to me. And at this point, I was in tears. Like, why wouldn't he leave me alone? He walked up to me, grabbed my hand, and kissed me on my cheek. He said, "It was nice meeting you," while saying my fake name, and then he walked away. I started crying at this point, and the mall guard asked me if I knew the guy. He asked me several questions and said he didn't intervene because he thought that I knew him. He noticed that I was extremely uncomfortable and asked if I wanted to give a statement with their head mall guard. The mall guard was able to take a good look at the old man and wanted to do some sketch so other guards would be alerted. I declined since my dad arrived and was waiting for me in another entrance at the opposite side of where I was. The security guard let me go, and I ran so fast to where my dad was waiting. I never told my parents because I was scared that they would get mad. I'm 26 now, and I still walk around that mall alone. But I never sat back on that bench in fear that that guy was still lurking around. So, to the mall stalker, let's not meet again. So I, a 13-year-old female, lived in an apartment building with my 40-year-old mom. My mom is married but separated. Before her and her husband separated, we lived in an apartment down the street and we had a neighbor who I'll name M. M would constantly make my mom feel uncomfortable. For example, when my mom would get home and do the laundry, she would put on her lazy bra. He happened to also be in the laundry room and he was talking to her and nudging her as some people do when making jokes and talking. But he was constantly nudging her around her top area, which made her uncomfortable. So, fast forward 5 years, they separate and we move down the street. Come to find out that he lives right next to us. When my mom would leave out of our apartment, so would he and pretend to go get the mail. The first couple times seemed as a coincidence, but it just kept happening. So about 2 weeks ago, we were going somewhere and my mom had to pick me up from home. She had to go inside for a moment and I was ready to go, so we just swapped keys. I'm waiting in the car, sitting on the driver's side with my cousin. He pulls up and is staring at me, so I make sure that the doors are locked. He then gets out and I see him in the mirror walking up to the car. I ignored him, but then he knocks on the window. He started talking, but I don't know what he said because I didn't roll the windows down. I was so scared that I stayed on my phone until my mom came out. I haven't seen him since, but I have kept my pocket knife on me every time that I'm alone. I'm a relatively small 19-year-old girl, and just a few hours ago, I was on my way home, leaving the train station near where I live. It was already dark outside, and not many people were around. Normally, that wouldn't creep me out because this area is quite peaceful. But today, someone followed me for a good 5 minutes. So, right after I left the train station, I noticed a young man walking in my direction. I thought he was headed towards the trains, so I didn't pay it any mind. I lighted my cigarette. Well, I live in Europe, so it's legal, and then went on my way. Somewhat weird, because I thought that I heard footsteps behind me, but because I was wearing solid boots, my own steps were too loud to make anything out. Also, I did just walk away from the trains and towards a big street, so it's not unusual that people are headed the same way as I am. After quite some time, I heard a soft, "Excuse me," behind me. Then again, a bit louder. "Excuse me." I turn around, and the same dude that went in the opposite direction as me at the station walked behind me slowly getting closer, and stops about a meter away from me, still tall enough to tower above me. I'm frozen in place, grabbing my umbrella a bit tighter and making myself look as big and as confident as I can as he breaks the silence with the most ridiculous question. "Do you have a boyfriend?" No. But now that you ask, yes." He kind of just stands there for a second, then turns around and walks away. I was scared shitless at that moment, and on the rest of my way home, I turned around 3 or 4 times because I didn't want him to follow me and know where I live. But eventually, I got home safe and nothing happened to me. And I don't know, maybe he just wanted to ask if I was single and maybe have my number. But dude, it's freaking dark outside and you followed me for quite some time. No, just no. That's fucking creepy as hell. Don't be like that, guys. Please. Just don't. I met Sean when we were in the same grade 6 class in 2001. We hardly spoke and he was mildly bullied due to his learning disability and awkwardness. He left the school the next year, and I never thought anything of him. In 2005, I received an MSN request and recognized his name and accepted. He asked me out on a date, claiming that he had always had a crush on me. I wasn't too alarmed and even flattered that he had remembered me after a few years. But the date was terrible and uncomfortable. He would constantly try to grab and kiss me, resulting in me telling him that I wasn't interested in dating him and that his behavior was inappropriate. He apologized and we became friends, but I kept him at a semi-safe distance. For years, he would ask me out and constantly try to grope me whenever I was around him, which was rarely. But after I finally cut him off, he began showing up at my work. And then the blackmail started. Sean would claim that I owed him money for things that didn't exist and demanded that instead of money, I send him nudes. At this point, I was in a serious relationship with my now wife, and I blocked him on everything after this. And while demanding nudes, also claimed that he wanted to move in with my wife and I and donate his sperm to us. A few months later, he had been completely radio silent. I had a pretty wicked operation that left me bedridden for months, as they had inserted rods into my legs, thus unable to walk for 6 weeks. One night, shortly after my surgery, my best friend was over at my house. She was supposed to go home, but instead ended up staying the night as I was home alone and she wanted to make sure that I was okay. At around midnight, my front door, which was always locked, opened, and Sean starts to walk into my basement where I was recovering. He was in absolute shock when he saw my friend sitting there. "What the fuck are you doing here?" My friend got up and started yelling at him, and he ran out of the house like a bat out of hell. I never heard from him ever again on anything. And after he left, my friend turning to me and said, "What if I wasn't here?" Well, I don't want to know. I was 17 when this happened. I spent the night at a friend's place, and it was still quite warm outside, still summer, so I decided to walk home from the little get-together. There were about 10 of us, and all of us carrying on and watching movies. Nothing exciting. I gave everyone a hug and a kiss goodnight. I had a can of drink and began to walk home. My house wasn't far. It was just a couple of blocks and the night air was pretty pleasant. The area was known for being safe too, and I forgot how many times I walked back home without any issues. I said my goodbyes and set off. It was quiet, and I was enjoying being out in the fresh night air. A man walked past me. Most men are pretty considerate and will try to show that they aren't dangerous. I expected to hear his footsteps, but I didn't. I tried to discreetly look over my shoulder at him, and he just stood there, watching me. I felt a shiver go down my spine. I didn't recognize him from anywhere. Immediately, I wanted to run home, but did my best to hide my fears. I doubled my speed, trying and failing to look unbothered by the situation. He then changed directions and began to follow me. I fiddled around in my pocket for my phone, and the short journey seemed so long, and I called one of my friends. "Hey! How are you?" I greeted her brightly, trying to be discreet. I didn't think at that time that I should call the police or something. I figured at that time that hearing that if I was talking to someone, he might think twice about actually starting something. "Hey, did you leave something here?" "Nah, I just wanted to talk." Thing is, I never want to call and I hate talking on the phone, so she was pretty suspicious. "Are you sure you're okay?" He didn't seem to care, and I kept walking and he wouldn't stop following me. The pace of his footsteps increased and I walked faster, and I knew that I shouldn't have gone home. I wanted to be where it was safest. I knocked frantically on the door, hoping for one of my parents to open the door. He didn't run towards me, and he waited on the path and watched. I could barely see his face. Then, I heard footsteps again behind me, and my knocking became more intense. When the door finally opened, I practically leapt inside and my dad gave me a confused look. I pointed outside and said that some creep was following me. My dad is a big guy, and he is a teddy bear, but he can be scary though, and he opened the door, and the guy ran off. Every so often though, when I'm home alone, I'm sure that I get a glimpse of him, staring in through one of my windows. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.